So my thoughts on SNAP and EBT being shut down on November 1st is a lot. And frankly, I do understand how hard it is for a lot of people to, of course, provide for their families and get the food that they need. With that, though, I will say that there is a lot of resources available for people who are food insecure or who live in food deserts. In fact, there are like shelters, there's food drives and pantries, as well as that churches will also help you if you're in a time of need. There's a church where I used to live. They would have a food drive every week, in fact, where you can stop by and get some, fruits, veggies, canned goods, unperishables, perishables, like, frozen turkeys and chickens, things like that. So there's so many places that will help you, and there's so many resources out there available. I kind of find it odd when people expect and demand the government to take care of them and their families when there's a lot of people who will help you aside from the government. What I will say is that when I was in high school, I went to a private Catholic all-girls high school. We actually spent about a month of our school time learning about food deserts, food insecurities, how they impact people, and different ways we can help prevent that. So I definitely do think that I am like well educated on this topic. So I'm not just coming from like a privileged perspective, although I will say I'm not the most affluent person out there. Of course, I did just recently finish college. I'm living on my own. I have a full-time job. It is just me that I have to pay for, and my cat, of course. So I don't have like a family that I'm providing for, but regardless of like your situation, a lot of people have to budget, maintain their finances, and figure things out. I personally actually haven't had any issues or difficulties with budgeting for groceries. And whenever I do hear that sentiment of people going, oh, well, groceries are very expensive these days, prices are very high, I always wonder where they're shopping because, as somebody who was previously very, very broke, and when I mean broke, I mean I just did not have anything in my savings. I was living paycheck to paycheck to now having money in my savings, and still not enough where I would ideally want to be, but enough where I can I wanted to go out to eat for dinner, I could. I don't because I'm trying to save as much as I can, but that's just some context for you guys, right? I just don't get that whole sentiment of like groceries are expensive because I'm like wondering where they're shopping. I shop at places like Aldi and Acme, and I will say, I mean, even online, the prices at Aldi are phenomenal. They are so cheap and the quality is superb, especially for their meats and perishable goods as well. Now, just to go briefly into like the type of foods that I'm buying, because that's kind of related to what I'll be talking about later on too. I do a mostly pescatarian-based diet. Not to say that I don't eat meat like chicken, beef, or pork. I love those. I just rarely eat them just because I don't have the taste for it. On a daily basis, I love fish, so whether that's sea bass, salmon, shrimp, cod, tilapia, or flounder, or trout. It doesn't really matter the type of fish because I'll eat it. And one thing I will say is that at Aldi, I can get a whole fillet for about $6 or $7, depending on how much it weighs, of course. And I don't even eat that whole fillet of fish for like a meal. I cut it up in half. So if the fillet is $6 and I'm saving half for the next day, that's $3 for a quality piece of fish that's a meal for myself. Now I typically eat about 1.5 meals a day. Reason why I say 1.5 is because my breakfast is not really the biggest. Of course, it is a meal depending on how you look at it, but it definitely is not what it used to be. I used to eat like chocolate graham crackers, a blueberry bagel with butter, as well as those Chobani flip yogurts for breakfast. And then I would have like a kiwi as a snack, hard-boiled egg. Then I would have shrimp scampi that I would make here, of course. And that's a very high buttery pasta heavier dish, and that's just lunch. And then I would come home and of course I would make some fried udon noodles, which I love. I love udon noodles. They're so delicious, but as you can see, that's a very heavy calorie diet. And the reason why they cut back, or not that I had to, I wanted to, not because I'm trying to lose weight, but just because I want to be as healthy as I can be. I just, was gaining a lot of weight from that diet, and I realized there's no need to eat like that because I wake up and I go to the office, get there by 9, and I don't even leave until 6. I get home by 7, and even when I do get home, I'm sitting. and I'm sitting now, which is funny, but I don't live an active life. I don't really go to the gym just because I would rather watch TV or do Pilates in my room. So I'm not even burning as much calories as I could be, especially to support that type of diet. So one thing I will say is that like a lot of people, a lot of Americans in general, I do think we need to take a step back and look at our diet as a whole, because a lot of it's just unnecessary. I understand that people will tell you, oh, well, it's genetics, or if I have a disability, my medication, all these excuses. Americans in the past have never been as big as we are today. And I think that says a lot because, of course, medication and genetics or disabilities, those have always been a thing. People have always had medications that make you gain weight or disabilities that make you, put on pounds or lose pounds slower. Whatever it is, that's your reasoning as to why it's hard to just not be in a more healthier weight range. Americans have dealt with that in the past. Of course, we haven't been as big as we are now. And that's just, nothing just pops up out of the blue like that, at least, for me. Like, I was gaining weight very, very quickly on that previous diet that I mentioned. Of course, now I do have like just a regular fried egg with avocado, some vegetables for breakfast, and then I'll have like a snack like oat milk. I'll snack on some arugula. I just will literally put some arugula in a Tupperware, just raw arugula, and just munch on it because it's just so good to me. It's so delicious. Instead of doing chips, I do arugula. And it's just the same type of mindless eating, but it's actually healthier. And then when I get home, I'll have my salmon, I'll have my vegetables, I'll have some avocado, and a starch like rice or potatoes, things like that. And that's just my meal, right? So it's a lot different than what I was eating. I do think that people should just take a step back and just reanalyze like their diets, because a lot of the content that I've seen online, like on Twitter, of people like bragging or posting their Snap food hauls, most of it is just junk food. It's like high processed name brand junk foods like Doritos or those Lucky Charms, cookies, chips, things like that. I rarely ever see like whole food items like vegetables or meats, things that you use to make meals like pasta, things like that, sauces. I rarely see that. It's just the already pre-made or processed items. And as well as that, I don't mean to be offensive when I say this. Of course, I'm not speaking for everyone, but this is just the majority of the videos that I've seen. The people who are posting these videos don't necessarily look like they are starving or in that much need of food, if you get what I'm putting down. These are like more heavy set individuals. They're bigger than me. And I think that's also very interesting. Not to say that you have to look a certain way in order to be hungry or qualify for certain, for help with food. Of course, like when I was working with food pantries, I've worked with loaves and fishes. I've saw all types of people. So of course, that's just something that I've noticed when it comes to people who are like bragging about these hauls and the types of food that they're eating. So I just think in general, that's just very interesting, because if we look at the diet and we try to take a step back and try to ration the diet, maybe we'll see, decreases in weights. And if you're not eating so much, you don't need to buy so much food, right? So it kind of, it actually helps out a bit more. If your goal is to save money and to have your food stretch out longer, then maybe eat a little bit less. Because if, you're just going to be sitting at home anyways, why are you eating up all the food that costs so much money? It just kind of doesn't make sense to me, right? And so going back to just buying food, right? When I shop at Aldi, I mentioned some of the prices. Now I do only oat milk because I don't like dairy products like that. I'll do like yogurt. I mentioned I do like, Chobani. But when it comes to just like drinking milk or making like lattes, I love matcha lattes. I will only use oat milk because it just tastes the best. And that's like around $2.80, just about $3. Eggs are about $2 as well. So more on the closer to the $2 side. So in total, it's like rarely over $5 that I spend for eggs and milk. And this is oat milk. It's not even like regular cow milk, 2%, non-fat, whatever. It's like traditionally oat milk has been seen as more of an expensive or luxury food item, but at Aldi, it's very affordable for me. And that's why I buy it. I also go to the Chinese food markets and I buy my matcha packets because it's like pre-sweetened matcha packets. And it's like $12, and that lasts me for the whole entire week. Compared to like going to any other place, it's like matcha packets or matcha in general is just like $30, $25, and I think that's absurd. So there's ways to save money when it comes to buying food. Just don't be, I wouldn't be shopping at like Target or Trader Joe's, Whole Foods, and then complain about the prices being high. Of course, they're going to be high there. So yeah, those are just some things to look at as well. And at the end of the day, I mean, we have to take personal accountability. I don't really understand the whole dependency on the government to help solve your food insecurity or your need for food. Expecting the government to do that type of service for you for a long term, to me, is not a good way to live life. It should never be a long-term case scenario, if that makes sense. The goal should always be like, this is temporary and we're working hard to find out a solution that works best for the family or for yourself, whatever it is that you need, right? Because with your options, right, if you live in a food desert, then maybe consider moving somewhere else. And I understand it's not like, oh, well, I can't just up and move. Of course, that takes time. I've seen a lot of stories in general, people who have grown up in less than ideal situations grow up to then surpass their experiences and to make a very good name for themselves, to be able to do what they want to do. So like those struggles build strong individuals to realize what it takes to get out of that struggle, right? So they put in that work. I think the same should apply here. Your goal should be to work hard, right? My mom didn't grow up with a lot. In fact, she had to work very hard. She worked on her own. She worked all throughout her school career, was able to afford her own college, got a job right after college, and to this day now she lives a very affluent life. I'm very proud of her. Of course, the goal for me is to follow in her footsteps, but of course I was raised with a very different case of circumstances. So from like how I'm approaching it, it's a little bit different. But I mean, at least for her, it's very admirable just to see those types of stories in general, people who grew up struggling to then not struggle anymore. And I only wish that for people who, are very dependent on like food stamps, because it should never, like, of course, nobody wants people to be hungry. Like, that's not why people are against SNAP existing, and people are happy that it's going to stop the funding on November 1st. That's not why. The reason why is because we want you to be able to work hard and to make a name for yourself and to put in the work to make your situation a lot better. So that takes personal accountability. It takes responsibility. If you're in a very tough situation, probably take a step back. When it comes to just like putting in that work, of course, it could be either finding a job that pays more so you can afford to feed your family or yourself, or moving to a place where you don't live in those food deserts where you're only subject to like very low bottom tier quality foods. And I would be very interested to know what your experiences are, what you think some good solutions would be, and of course, where do you shop and what types of foods do you buy, because I'm always intrigued. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.